we'll get started. We figured since, Chetan brought up GenAI at the end of his last panel, we better assemble one quickly to talk about GenAI. So welcome. I think we got half the room up here, so I think we're good. Anyhow, so welcome to panel number 3. We're going to take a little break from just general AI and RAN to talk about something very different, GenAI and Telco. It's not related to what you've heard so far, but we figured why not. So we're going to take a journey. So this is not just the biggest panel, it's also the longest panel. So bear with us while we prepare lunch. Promise is going to be good. But you don't get lunch until you watch a demo. You knew there was a catch, right, Mark? Right? Yeah. RAN GPT, which is what Aira announced today. So if you've been tracking your PR Newswire on your phones, you would have seen the announcement of RAN GPT, which is the use of GenAI. So the question was, how do I use GenAI on a RAN? Well, Robbie's going to do a demo of how you use GenAI. Just one example of how you use RAN with GenAI. I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So it's 2 demos, one right after this. So you're welcome to stay in the room if you're not hungry yet. And you really want to watch GenAI in the RAN, stay here. The rest of you can go grab lunch. About 30 minutes after that, there'll be a second demo. And if you like the first one so much, you're welcome to come back again and watch it in slow motion this time as Robbie types slower, and you watch it and you'll be impressed. I was impressed. I'll be frank. I was impressed by what I saw, and I think you'll be too. So, all right. So with that advertisement out of the way, let's get started with GenAI and Telco. So to start, we thought we'd talk about what is GenAI, because no one quite understands what it really is, but we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about the use of GenAI, the use cases in the telco may not just be the RAN, because obviously it has wide applicability. Because as we all know, we all use ChatGPT every day to write out emails, to summarize things, to make key business decisions. ChatGPT is behind all of that. And so in the telco, it's safe. After we cover that, because it is RAN Day, we're going to dig into a little bit more. Started the last panel, we're going to dig a little bit more into GenAI with networking in general and the RAN specifically. And because GenAI is so safe and so wonderful, we'll have something to talk about best practices and risk mitigation and managing risk with the use of GenAI at the telco. And then finally, because we know that a lot of people that's watching out there are from the telcos, the telco leadership, board members, and so on, that they may want to understand what the best practices are, what the best advice is. And so we'll leave you a little bit, or the panel will leave you with the best recommendations if you're in leadership position at a telco, how best to start with or use GenAI. So with the 7 folks here, 7 experts, there's going to be a wide range of opinions and probably all very useful. So let's get started. Now, what is GenAI? And who better to explain what is GenAI than someone who's built a big foundation model out there that you should try out even if you're using ChatGPT. Claude is highly recommended, especially with a 100K context window. So you can put that entire paper in there and ask it to summarize it, not chunk it like we always do on ChatGPT. So let's have Amir explain what is GenAI and how is it different from old AI, as what Jane called it earlier, right? Older AI. Older AI. Like clients always tell me, no traditional AI, no legacy AI. No, it's predicted AI. I'm like, well, GenAI is also predicted. Why don't you introduce yourself as well? I'm going to have it. Yeah, in the meantime.
Yes, my name is Rakesh Misra. I am with VMware, where I am responsible for all R&D engineering for the VMware RAN intelligent controllers and the service management and orchestration. So my team at VMware is responsible for building not just the core products, which are the near real-time REC, non-real-time REC, and the other SMO services, but we also build software development kits to enable the ecosystem to build applications and bring their innovation to the RAN. Last year, we launched a RIC partner program, the VMware RIC partner program. In over a year, we now have over 25 partners like Aira Technologies who are using our SDKs and all the other developer resources that we have made available to build various XApps and RApps and really bring their innovation to the radio access networks, to the operators. My background, I'm a wireless a systems wireless communications engineer by training. I did my PhD at Stanford. And then during my PhD, I self-trained myself in AI. In those days, unlike today, this was back in the early 2010s. If you wanted to learn AI, you only had the one course from Stanford University by Andrew Ng.
Yeah.
So I did that course, but beyond that, you were on your own. So you had to figure out. So my PhD dissertation turned out to be at the intersection of AI and machine learning and radio access networks. And I co-founded a startup out of my PhD dissertation called Uhana Inc., where we were building back in those days an AI/ML platform for RAN analytics and optimization. Today we call that the RAN intelligent controller, but of course when we started it, the term RIC did not exist. In 2019, Uhana got acquired by VMware, so that's how my team is at VMware now, where we are continuing the mission by building the RAN intelligent.
And you were going to add to what Amir was saying.
So, like I said, I'm a self-trained kind of in AI. So when I was learning about generative AI, 1 to 2 years back, we were all these terms: generative AI, foundation models, large language model, GPT, chat GPT. And I was like, what do all these things mean? And, how do I organize them in my head? So I'll just take a minute or two to provide like a mental map or hierarchy of these terms. So it just helps everyone better understand what these terms mean. So we have generative AI, which is a subdiscipline of AI related to generating new content, new data, like Amir was explaining. Generative AI is realized through what are called foundation models. Foundation models are the tools of or the AI models that enable generative AI. And these foundation models are large models which have been trained on massive data sets and are capable of performing a wide variety of general tasks. LLMs, or large language models, are one class of foundation models. They're definitely not the first or only class of LLMs. Or of foundation models. There have been foundation models before LLMs. Based on GANs, generative adversarial networks, based on variational autoencoders. But LLMs certainly are the most recent and definitely by far the most popular. LLMs are what has enabled or is enabling businesses and enterprises to apply generative AI at scale across many verticals. So that's LLMs, large language models. And then there are many examples of LLMs, right? There are many LLMs that are being developed by different organizations. So we have Claude, which is being developed by Anthropic. We have GPT, which has been developed by OpenAI. We have Llama, which is developed by Meta. So these are all examples of large language models. And then we have applications using those large language models. For example, Chat GPT, which we talk about quite a bit, is an application that uses GPT. There are many applications that are being built using Claude, using Llama, and so on, right? So generative AI realized through foundation models. LLMs are one example of foundation models. GPT, Claude, Llama are examples of LLMs. And then Chat GPT and things like Chat GPT are applications that make use of these. Hopefully that helps. This is how I learned myself. So I thought it was
No, that's helpful. And LLMs underneath DL and DL underneath ML and underneath AI, right? So yes, we're going to go all the way up, right? So now that Rakesh has actually answered your question, you're taking your answer. Gwenael.
Oh, I didn't know. I would just.
No, that's okay. No, that's. I was just like, yeah, you're reading the script, but that question actually was assigned to him. But that's fine. But no worries. Because there are other things that, Gwenael, you want to add. And maybe before you go there, maybe tell us about what you do at Dell. And then let's talk about some of the changes in, models or computing capacity or, the amount of data sets that's available that's enabled LLM. So go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Roy. I'm Gwenael Poitau. I joined Dell 18 months ago. At Dell, I'm part of the CTO office. I lead some research programs covering actually most of the topics that we discussed today. So from energy efficiency, generative AI, network digital twin. To complement what has been said, I think in the last year especially, we have seen some strong innovation trends. The first one is the shift in the knowledge distillation. So we started from human to large language models, and now from those large models to smaller models with which improve the training efficiency, and which is quite important because we were talking about energy efficiency. We will need smaller models at the edge in order to execute some of the use cases that we will discuss today. So it's an important trend, and that's something that works quite well. The second trend is about the reasoning. So for some of the use cases that we will discuss today, we need the LLM or the agentic framework around the LLM to reason about the use case. And there's also a lot of research and a lot of applications on the evolved instruction tuning, where you provide a model of the reasoning with a set of instructions. You can also generate that with other models. And you get to the solution for that specific use case. And again, it's surprising how efficient it is for complex reasoning, and we are just at the starting point of that. And just to finish on the data, can identify two types of data, and it will be important as we were discussing how we collect all that data from the telecom network. The data that will be used for the training on the fine-tuning that you can do on a slow and periodic basis, and the data that you can use to complement the prompt that will be used by the LLM that can go in the vector database and that can be updated very frequently. So that's part of what we do at Dell to understand, again, depending on the use case, how much we need to keep for the retraining of the model and how much we can leverage directly in the vector database that will be used by the model. There is also some security implications, of course, for the two types of data. Just to conclude on this first part, on the model side, I think what is extremely interesting also is so the agentic framework around LLM. LangChain is a good example of this kind of tools. Where, and we see that LLM is not the solution by itself for most of the use cases that we will discuss today. But if you combine that with a knowledge graph, with a vector database that has some contextual information, we are talking about that, with some active discriminative AI/ML agents that will, and then the LLM becomes the orchestrator of that framework. It reduces the energy consumption of that, and just activate the other parts of the framework in order to execute the optimization on the given use case. And just the last point about multimodality. It's very recent, but I think it will be also important in the discussion that we will have today. So it's not text only, and now you can have some image as input or output of the foundation model that we were discussing. Image that can be an RF map, for example. You can use that to provide a digital twin of the RF map. It can be some RFIQ signals, similar to audio signals. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it opens a lot of opportunities, I think, for the future.
Yep. No, I think multimodality is certainly one of the elements that I think we're all looking for. And it's not just the image and the audio and the videos that we see on the internet, but in fact, multimodality could be RF signals and other feeds into it. In fact, we saw a demo at OCP Summit last week where they were using the RF signals to explain what was going on inside a room. So the RF interference patterns in the room, they could say, oh, there's two individuals, they're both walking in, or they're, that's kind of scary, but very interesting, right? I mean, multimodality. But thank you, Gwenael, for that. So we're not going to go super deep into GenAI. There's plenty to learn, right? Your RAG frameworks, your vector databases, which everyone should have a personal vector database at this point in time, right? Or whatever. But we'll talk about actually some of the use cases. What are businesses using GenAI for? I'm sure at Juniper, you're not just building GenAI. You're probably using GenAI and consuming it. So what's the relevance to the business?
Yeah, absolutely, Roy.
But introduce yourself.
Oh, sure. Hi, my name is Ajit Patankar. I lead the data science AML team within Juniper's technology organization. I started my AML journey what's called as the dark winter of AIML. So when I graduated from Berkeley, there was no AIML. I became what's called as a quant, a financial. So I worked almost 15 years in the quantitative finance area. And about 10 or 11 years back, I essentially went rogue in my fintech company. And I did two jobs. I did my day jobs, so made sure I didn't get fired. And then I learned AIML somewhat similar to Rakesh on my own. And that became the kind of the AI/ML team in that fintech org. I also initiated AI/ML in another fintech org, and then about 5 years back, I joined a startup which had a contract with the Global AI Accelerator Initiative division of Ericsson. And that team got acquired by Ericsson, and at that time, I chose to join Juniper. I've been working with our CTO, Raj Avatkar, and T. Sridhar. Many of you might know him from VMware. So last year, when ChatGPT came on board, Juniper management launched a strategic initiative under Raj's leadership. So he's a exec sponsor for everything GenAI in Juniper. And we have had a fantastic journey in last 1 year, evaluating various use cases, implementing them. So we are already, second or third iteration of many of the use cases. So given that perspective, let me explain where I see GenAI fits into business.
Yes.
I'm sure you guys have heard that software will eat the world. That's a very famous saying by Mark Anderson. However, that has applied mostly to transaction systems so far. For example, credit card processing. There is a small AI/ML angle there in fraud detection, but it's like a straight through transaction. GenAI, in my opinion, and if you want like a one line answer how it will impact businesses, it will impact all the knowledge processes in a business. And there would be consequent impact on top line, the revenue, and as well as the bottom line. So with that, we can dive in. So I classify GenAI application or impact in roughly 3 areas. One is business processes. So every organization has, finance, legal, supply chain, HR functions. All of them would be impacted significantly. For example, let's take legal. You have contract review by your legal attorneys. That review process is completely human-driven. Your, either paralegal or lawyer would be reviewing that. A part of that process would be done using GenAI. For example, redlining of a contract. So instead of having 20 paralegals, potentially you can have fewer of them, or you can have them do, much larger piece of work. So that is the impact in business processes. The second key impact is in product development. We have a second part of the session where we are going to talk about networking. And so I will not dive much into that. But you guys may have heard stories about how GenAI is being applied in drug discovery, pharmaceutical industry, material science, and of course, software development. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth in that area later on. And then the third area is all human-to-human interaction, whether it's directly through email, chats, and so on. It might be structured in services. So L1 support, L2 support, L3 support, that is one area that is going to be significantly impacted using GenAI. And all of that will be based on some part what Amir talked about using foundation models, but not directly from ChatGPT, not the foundation model that has learned the knowledge that is in public domain, but using your domain specific, your enterprise specific document corpus.
Sure.
So that would be the starting point for all business applications.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. And so in the future, when I chat with Juniper, it's actually Marvis behind it.
Absolutely.
Marvis for everything.
Marvis, that's our branding.
That's your branding. Anyway, so very, very good. So with that, I think, probably you've heard a lot about what is GenAI. We've gone a little bit beyond what's GenAI and applicability to businesses. But obviously, there's the World Wide Web out there, and there's plenty of resources out there available. So we're going to move on to sort of phase 2 or theme number 2, which is GenAI use cases in telcos. And, Ajit started a little bit on that, but we'll be diving much more into that. And to kick us off on the GenAI use cases at telcos, we're going to talk to some folks who actually work with a lot of telcos across the world. Gloria and our host, McKinsey, our host. So certainly we're going to be nice to them. You work a lot. It's a good question, by the way. It's designed for McKinsey. You work with a lot of service providers around the world, helping them transition and transform. And McKinsey's had the practice in AI, ML, DL for many, many years now, right? And now there's GenAI. So in your work or your team's work, what do you see as some of the use cases across telcos? Some early ones, where are they seeing some early success, and what are they looking forward to, as they get into GenAI?
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess follow the crowd, do a quick intro of myself.
Yes, go ahead.
Associate partner at McKinsey, specializing in actually telecom, especially with AI and now GenAI focus. Perfect. So I guess I see GenAI as a turbocharger for a company when they build their capability, regardless where your maturity is in terms of, your digital or AI maturity. So if you actually had AI, maturity in the past, this is going to help you accelerate. If you actually were a little bit lagging behind comparing to your peers, actually GenAI is going to be almost one of the rare time you have a time to catch up and leapfrog into a, almost like an on par position compared to your peers. When we talk about, I guess, benefit and use cases, I like to think of it across business functions, business functions in terms of more customer-facing functions, marketing, sales, customer care, in the telco world, ops functions, such as, our network, deployment, wireless network deployment, or, field repair and maintenance. And obviously the backend functions, such as, IT, finance, legal, as we mentioned before. So we can dive in a bit into each. On the marketing and sales side, you will typically see in the past digital AI influencing in the way that we can identify micro segmentation of customer and trying to target them, right? It's because, we have customer data through their credit card with, loyalty programs, so we can actually identify them. However, the true content creation, the creative portion of it is still done by human being. But now with GenAI, of course, you can actually complement on top of the AI digital capability in the past and truly customize very personalized content marketing campaign for those micro segment of customer. Or on the sales side, you can actually personalize customer sales outreach and truly do a lot of, outreach at large scale, way larger than, human being team will be able to handle, right? That's typically on the marketing and sales side. We actually see, again, through the privilege working with a lot of operator, we see about 20 to 40%, a different range of conversion rate increase when they leverage GenAI in marketing and sales. And on customer care, I think this is the area that I guess all of us see the most common use cases, a GenAI bot, interacting with the customer. But I would like to highlight the difference between the bot. It's actually very different when different operators are leveraging it. Some actually are still using a very rule-based, not really a GenAI bot. It's actually pre-programmed questions and answers or FAQ type of form. And some operator are truly actually going into GenAI empowered bot, which actually they will see a huge difference. So about 30-40% of actually the customer engagement, the traffic shifted towards the GenAI virtual assistant versus, again, human customer service team in India where, different outsourced countries, they actually would be able to optimize their load and only focus on the high complex issue to solve. And then moving on to the core network side, we actually see GenAI being able to impact the entire life cycle of network deployment, starting from network planning to RAN design engineering, to site acquisition, to inventory management, to construction project management. You will be able to leverage GenAI. And, in what means? Without going too deep, think about if there actually was AI before. For example, in RAN, there's definitely a lot of AI ML that's happening. GenAI actually, for the very minimum, can improve the quality, the accuracy of those AI ML model, or help with the performance management of it to make sure we can continue to, test it and try the accuracy of the correlation to make sure the accuracy is improved. But I'm sure later on through the RAN GPT thing, probably we're going to see something even more fascinating. And on the field and field repair and maintenance side, in the past, you actually will see using digital or advanced analytics, leveraging AI advanced analytics to operationalize or optimize NOC, right? To actually triage issues, tickets of your field engineers to be able to send the right level of capability of engineers to different level of issues to resolve the issues. However, now with GenAI, what you can do is you can actually have GenAI to digest a very dry technical manuals. Typically would take a very seasoned, experienced field agent, a field engineer to be able to take years of experience to be able to learn that level of capability. Now GenAI can actually be able to let very junior field engineers to onboard and upskill very quickly. So it actually has tremendous value there. And lastly, I guess want to highlight a little bit on the backend offices side. What we see the biggest impact is in fact, of course, software development. Not only just developing itself, testing it, refactoring legacy code, which is a huge issue among big operators that have so much legacy code and there's so many different use cases, different partners they have been working with at different time of the years on AI models, on the old school, like analytical models, but then how to refactoring and harmonizing all the code, GenAI is, providing tremendous help. So we are very bullish about the future of GenAI.
Excellent, very good. And as you can imagine, McKinsey answer is a full framework answer from left to right. So I think if we just took GenAI and transcribed that, you would now have a full entire tweet, right? Very good, very nicely done, and which is why it's a perfect question for the perfect person. Very good. So I think Salil has a difficult job now. Exactly. We're going to go to Salil and say now, after the comprehensive and completely 100% correct answer, we go to Salil and say, well, you two work with, as AWS, you work with a lot of telcos, right? And you work with them on all sorts of infrastructure projects, including AI and ML, and now a GenAI, right? So are you seeing some of these examples in real life? Are there POCs and trials? Is it consistent with what AWS is seeing in working with your telco partners?
Thanks.
Yeah, but you can get 110%. It's 10% of that.
So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Salil Sawhney. I lead product management for accelerated compute for Cloud RAN, as well as building software automation services that are used for building networks across all of AWS's infrastructure. We recently launched a service called Telco Network Builder at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And so that service now allows customers worldwide to be able to take network functions from hundreds of partners and be able to build 5G networks at scale on AWS.
It's not GenAI powered yet, right? Next week.
Next week,
yeah.
Or maybe tomorrow.
Maybe tomorrow. Sorry.
Great. So with all those cues, without me saying anything, I'd say that we see a lot of interest from customers in the GenAI space, and that's expected. But what we've done is, apart from just talking to customers, we've also taken some steps to go work with market research firms and have them to talk to our customers across a broad swath of them and collect some of these inputs and provide them back to us. And we recently published a report, and this is by a strategy consulting firm, Altman Solon, that published a report at the Mobile World Congress Americas very recently. And coming out of that report, what we learned is that across all of these customers, what we are seeing is at least 1 in 5 customers across the telco space are already looking at using GenAI this year. That moves to 1 in 3 in the next year, and maybe 1 in 2 the year after. So the degree of interest that these customers are communicating, not just to us, but to also our research partners, is very significant. If I were to break down some of the key areas that we are seeing significant interest in, like obviously chatbots is a huge area of interest, right? Being able to use for customer service. And that's very common across every single one of these customers. But what the highest value use case that we are seeing is really network operations. And I think kind of taking the cues from what Gloria mentioned, network operations is a huge area of emphasis for every telco that's running a large scale service across millions of customers. And the network operations aspect is not just like troubleshooting, but it's also actually setting up these networks So we see customers really wanting to be able to use GenAI to automatically configure these networks. So really employ the principle of software-defined networking and take it to telco networks at scale. So be able to automatically quickly configure these networks using LLMs, being able to root cause analysis the entire networks. And I mean, everybody in this room that comes from the telco space knows the telco space is actually, a number of different silos. So you have a radio network team, you have a core network team, you have a voice network team. Each one of these teams has data in different silos in different forms. And what you really need with GenAI is to be able to, extract all of this information and create a, map of this network and be able to deconstruct where the actual issue is. So this seems to be a, huge problem statement that exists in the industry. And, customers are really trying to figure out how they can use GenAI for this. And be able to set up these networks and troubleshoot them in real time. The second area that we see a lot of interest in is really looking at kind of improving productivity of their employees, right? So most of these customers are serving other enterprise customers in some shape or form, or other customers at some point in time. And so they get a lot of these RFPs. When you have all of these RFPs coming in, it's a very tedious and manual process. Now, can you use large language models to be able to take previous RFP responses and auto-generate RFP response in the future? That's kind of another key use case that we're seeing with a lot of interest. Clearly, for marketing purposes, being able to generate different kinds of marketing materials is a very, very common use case. So I would say across the spectrum, these are the 3-4 big areas of emphasis for our customers. And customers are coming to AWS saying we want to be able to leverage all of the services that you have, all the different foundation models we work with. We work very closely with Anthropic. Yep. We support AI services that give customers really the choice and the flexibility that they need to figure out, based on the customer use case, what's the right large language model to use. So
that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, I think choice is important, especially as we all learn. We're still very early. All the methods, may change tomorrow, right? Tomorrow, back to database is not in because RAG is useless because we can just fine tune everything. Not that's not going to happen. But that choice is very important. And yes, I think you've emphasized what Gloria said in terms of telcos want to turbocharge themselves, obviously, and some of those areas you talked about, sales and marketing, chat with anything. I think that's all very useful, and we'll keep off the networking stuff a little bit longer because we're actually going to go into that in phase 3, right? Or
I'd leave some space for Ajit.
yeah. Ajit's ready. We don't want to mess up his script, right? So, so to wrap up this telco use cases before we get into RAN and our favorite topic and networking, right? So Rakesh, at VMware, you guys work with a lot of telcos in many different areas, right? So data center virtualization, the back office stuff, secure workspaces, and of course telco and RAN. Across all those elements, where do you see sort of GenAI overlap from a telco perspective use case? Was there any sort of new services it overlaps with, like for instance, edge computing, right? So what are you guys seeing?
Yeah, so edge computing, of course, is a very exciting new area, and VMware is a provider of edge computing software platforms.
Yep.
The kind of use cases we're seeing is actually very consistent with what Ajit has mentioned with respect to use cases that for GenAI across organization.
Yep.
And the same use cases apply to the
telco as an organization.
Telco as an organization. It's very consistent with what Gloria has shared in terms of network operations, and Salil touched upon a few of them as well. And that is exactly the same thing we are seeing. The most immediate use case, use of GenAI that we are seeing is in the area of what people call edge ops, or operations of the edge computing platform. And there are several, problem statements or use cases within that space that we are working on, and the industry more broadly is already working on. So it's very consistent with what you hear from your research partners. So for example, how do you orchestrate all these edge workloads? Right. That is a big problem because the edge is very distributed, right? And depending on the specific SLAs, specific latency and data requirements, you need to be intelligent in how you place your edge workloads on the different available clusters. So now you can use LLMs, for example, to create the service descriptors, right? You can use you can prompt in natural language and have the LLMs generate those service descriptors for you that you feed into your edge orchestration solution. How do you set policies and configurations for your edge computing infrastructure, including your network? You can now use natural language. You can use plain English to convey your intent and have the LLMs create those policies for you or create those configuration changes for you. So you no longer need to be as much of an expert in the policy language or expert in the configuration management system. Now you can use LLMs to take care of doing that translation for you. And then how do you troubleshoot and how do you do predictive maintenance, right? If you have an SRE and the SRE is facing an issue with respect to the edge computing platform, there's a lot of documentation available. And today the SRE has to go through a large swath of documentation. But again, as we have already discussed, LLMs are a very natural fit for this problem. They can look across all the available document and quickly help the SRE find the right resolution. So I think the area of edge ops is where I think most of the immediate use cases of GenAI will materialize. So these are things that we can expect to see in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And then as we go forward, of course, and when we talk about GenAI, there's a very popular saying that the most exciting use case for GenAI is one we have not seen yet.
Yeah, so that's true.
So we don't know, what would be the killer use case that comes about in the future. But at least in the next 12 months, I see use cases around edge ops being the most interesting application of GenAI.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. I think, a lot of times, it's not just in telco, right? In industrial manufacturing and the like, or even in aircraft, aerospace, looking at the documentation and then trying to figure out what's going on or even learning from it or troubleshooting, root cause analysis, I think as Jane was saying, RCA, right? It takes a while. And to the extent that GenAI can summarize things for you, bring it up, faster or teach you a concept faster or isolate it is better, right? So I'm just waiting for someone to say, explain TR69 to me like a script from Brazilian soap opera, right? But it will try, right? I have no idea what's going to come out, but maybe we'll try that. That's a very specific use case. It's a critical use case. Anyhow, so all right, we're going to move on to GenAI and networking and the RAN now. That's the sort of the hottest part of this topic. So I've just been waiting to talk about GenAI and networking and RAN. So, I know we've talked a bit on the edges, we've touched a little bit, but maybe let's delve into it. GenAI and networking and RAN.
So Roy, the GenAI networking, there are multiple aspects to it. One is how do you design and operate a networking equipment? That is one aspect. I will also touch on a little bit on AI ops because there was a lot of discussion on it, and I will explain, kind of relationship of GenAI to AI ops. And then finally, I will touch base on the 5G RIC space a little bit because I also work with the Aira and Constantine. We support their organization as well. So for networking equipment or network management software, the key is going to be what Gloria talked about. How do you develop those products? And essentially, 80-90% of the functionality is in software. So that is one area that is going to be significantly impacted. And I don't want to repeat what Gloria said, but we are already seeing very good traction. We have, I would say, probably 100-odd engineers for whom GenAI is now part of their day-to-day working life. And you cannot take it away from them. They would rebel.
Yep.
And
it's that important.
Yes, absolutely. The second aspect is how do you interact with networking equipment, networking software. I'm sure everyone has seen command line interfaces. Those may not be replaced, but there would be something that would augment them using GenAI. So, truly kind of intent-driven configuration, intent-driven networking, that would get implemented through GenAI where, you specify the intent, you specify the specifications and not a foundation model, but something that is trained on the domain-specific documentation would generate a first level of configuration. And to be realistic, no one is going to take this configuration from a LLM and then execute it on your network device.
Someone will.
The news story next day.
Someone will, right? Some lawyer's going to do that.
Yeah. So all this will have human in the loop. So that is also our internal, philosophy, that internal, strategic decision, that many of these Gen AI applications would have human in the loop. So this is not going to replace network operator, network engineer, but it will, augment them. It will help in their productivity. So that is on the networking equipment and network management software. Let me go a little bit into AI Ops. AI Ops is, at least in my opinion, is essentially collecting KPIs from your devices or management software to your data lake or to your real-time system. And first of all, analyzing anomalies. There are literally hundreds of ML AI techniques to analyze anomalies. Then second part that we in Juniper have, I won't say pioneered because I don't know what else is there, but at least we have mastered, that is closing the loop. So from anomalies, we go to root cause identification, and there are various techniques with that, starting from simple statistical Granger causality to we have gone into graph neural network, and we close the loop. We have essentially self-driving network. So that is the missed experience that you are referring to. So this AI Ops part, I don't think it will change significantly. This is by its own nature, it is very quantitative oriented. It is based on time series data. It won't change. But where it will have Gen AI, impact is you have these event databases. You are like, hundreds of devices, hundreds of KPIs on each devices. Your dashboard is flooded. So to interact with that dashboard is where Gen AI will come into play. You will have a natural language query that says, hey, where is the issue in my network? Where is the issue that I need to focus on? So instead of having a SQL query or complex time series database query, that would be the Gen AI interface that at least I see as, related to AI Ops.
That helps. I think Joel was saying, you get one event and you get a million alarms.
Absolutely.
Gen AI will say, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Take care of it.
And let me finish with, 5G or RICS area. So whatever I said about AI Ops, that is of course valid with 5G RICS. 5G, one key issue that, that was also discussed was lack of data. And this is where generative AI will play some role, but not the foundation language models. The area of AI/ML called as generative adversarial network. So it's a, about 10-year-old technique, GAN technique. There's another technique, variational autoencoders. So we have been doing this for last 2-3 years, along with Arda and Constantine. So when we didn't have 5G data, we used these techniques to generate the data. And finally, one possible futuristic application of Gen AI is going to be the MIMO, machine-to-machine interfaces of 5G. The orchestration, the workflow across those machines is potentially could be generated using Gen AI. So that is the agent frameworks in generative AI. So that is, at least in my experience, I don't see anything immediate like enterprise ready. But I think that's a good possibility, maybe year, 2 years, maybe sooner than that,
Yeah, no, I think I think the agentic approach to it, I think that that orchestration planning steps, right, with regard to the network, the RAN, I think that's absolutely coming up. And speaking of the RIC and the RAN, which is what we're here to talk about, generally speaking, Gen AI and RIC, it's kind of a Anyway, so why don't you go ahead? I think everyone knows that it's going to be GenAI and Rick, right?
Yes.
Because it's Gen GPT. Right? I mean, RAN GPT. Sorry, Gen GPT. Oh my God. RAN GPT. I told you it was a difficult name. RAN. So Robbie, share with us GenAI and Rick, in the RAN. What's the use cases for that? And then after you go, then we'll have Rakesh and see if he's got anything to add to that. Hopefully 100% answer.
Okay. Yeah. Quick introduction. I'm Ravi. I'm one of the co-founders of Aira Technologies, also the CTO. So I broadly responsible for the tech stack within the company. I also lead the AI systems group and the group that kind of came up with the idea for RAN GPT. So to answer your question, Roy, the way we think about the utility for a tool like RAN GPT is telco networks are generating tons of data all across the stack. And that's a pro and a con. I'll tell you why. It's a good thing because that's just a goldmine of information. You can better design networks, you can better manage networks, you can improve efficiency, you can even monetize that data better and improve revenues for the network. And that's a good part. But the bad part is now it requires a specialized team that knows how to wrangle this data. What used to be small data that wireless experts are able to wrangle and gain insights from now has been split into two teams that need to work in tango. Someone who knows how to ask the right questions and someone to translate that into code that can operate on large databases in an efficient manner. And in our conversations with operators, we came to know that this process of experimentation on big data takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months to close the loop. And we all know that in the last 10 years, quick experimentation, quick A/B testing, validation of experiments and ideas are key for innovation. And this is a way we think of essentially killing ideas. Is one of the operators told us that by the time we go from an idea to coding it up, verifying it, and figuring out whether this works or not, the person who came up with the idea forgot what the idea was all about, right? So, and this is not to, and this is just the chaos that happens in large organizations. It's inevitable because the data science team has their own kind of intake process, and the wireless team has their own cadence of generating ideas. And so the way we thought about RAN GPT was, if we can shorten that circle time of coming up with ideas and validating them on real data, operational data, wouldn't that be great? And so we think of it as two distinct paradigms. One is, like a few people mentioned, human in the loop. There is an expert asking questions of the data. Can we get answers back? And there we are dealing with a lot of operational challenges, like how much of that has to be GenAI and how much of that has to be standard software. Because like a few folks mentioned here, the superpower of GenAI is really understanding the intent behind human language, right? Even if you don't very clearly specify an intent, it's able to understand because it knows how to talk. And but you don't want that power to be used for doing very standard things like
1 + 1.
Yeah, or so you want to use it to map human intent to some code, and then once that code is generated, how that code gets run on a large database, this is pretty standard software. We know how to do it, but therein lies the problem. That boundary of translating code that was generated into a large database, where will that run? Will we extract some columns from large database and run it on the GenAI side, or will GenAI directly operate on the large? So these are some of the complexities that we need to deal with, and Rick is a great place for some of these issues to be resolved. Then the second paradigm is to be able to deal with streaming data. this is where RIC plays even bigger of a role. As we start talking to operators, they have already started asking us things beyond just a human query. They are asking us, can we write automations? Can we write codelets and snippets of code that can then be deployed on the network and run without a human in the loop? Yep. And there that becomes a bigger challenge, because dealing with streaming data and making sure that the plumbing works is a tough task to start with. Now you're talking about streaming data where the pipes can be dynamic. Depending on the query, right, what kind of streaming data needs to be gathered and wrangled with can be dynamic. So how do you deal with dynamically setting up streaming pipelines? So that's a whole another challenge. How do you package it into apps that can run on the RIC? And how do you write guardrails into that app using conversational language? How do you validate that software? So I'm just throwing a whole lot of problems that we are facing, because while GenAI is exciting and there's just so much potential, we are also excited about solving some of these real life problems and operationalizing it and actually making it work on a network, doing POCs, and a lot of excitement. Hopefully I'm conveying that.
No, I think that's good. I think, and I think the audience probably appreciates the fact that you're being candid about sort of the state of the art and where it really is. We're not saying it's ready to be put out there, human in the loop or otherwise, but there is work to be done. And yes, I think that's the exciting part, which is this opportunity.
And that work is not all GenAI work. Once again, it needs to be clever software engineering with GenAI as the front end, and that can be packaged. And the field is moving really quickly, so it may not be that far away making all this work. But that's where I think we are getting to the last part where we talk about how can operators help in this process.
That's right.
But we'll talk about that.
No, I completely agree with Ravi. It's not all GenAI. I have seen some companies, they kind of package their work as GenAI, but that's fine. That's a marketing, branding effort. That's perfectly okay. But I think he's absolutely...
I think you're right on. And I think, that balance, striking that balance and setting the right expectations, I think it is very valuable, not overhyping it. Yeah. Rakesh, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so with respect to use cases for GenAI in networking and RAN, I think we have already touched upon a wide spectrum of use cases. So my response will probably serve as a summary.
Sure, that would be helpful because we're moving on to the next.
Yes, so exactly. Only we don't need me.
Yeah, I think you do a better job. So yeah.
So so let me summarize the use cases we have talked about in the order they appear in the software lifecycle itself. And I'll focus my answer on this area of plan intelligence and network intelligence more broadly. So the first stage of the software lifecycle is the design of the algorithm itself, right? And we work with a lot of partners. Like I mentioned, we have over 25 partners who are part of our RIC partner program. One common problem that we have heard from all of them is that we want to train ML models, but we just don't have enough data. So how do we build ML models, right? And this is and I being in the RAN industry and being a champion of innovation in the RAN, I sometimes feel a little embarrassed when I look at my colleagues in other domains like autonomous vehicles or computer vision. They have they have access to such enormous large data sets, that they can use for building complex models, doing benchmarking, comparisons, and so on. Whereas there is no such publicly available large, RAN data set, right? So one of the things that GenAI can do, as Ajit was also mentioning, is create synthetic data. Yep. Right? You have limited amount of data, have large language models or like specific foundation models, not necessarily always large language models. Yep. Understand patterns in the data and create synthetic data that still is useful for you when it comes to training AI/ML models. So this is kind of AI helping build more AI, right? Yep. So that's the first use case appears right at the start of the software lifecycle. Then after the algorithm is ready, so when it comes to developing the software, developing an R app or an X app or any other app, right? The soft piece of software that implements that algorithm. That's where we run into a problem where a lot of the folks who work on the algorithms are usually ML engineers or wireless engineers, not necessarily software engineers. So their level of software expertise is not complete. So typically we'll have an ML engineer working with a software engineer, right, to get that algorithm deployed or ready as a software. So this is where LLM has huge potential in terms of code generation, or at least code snippet generation. Right? So if you have come up with a great RAP algorithm, XAP algorithm, but you have the design spec as a designer, you have a design spec. Now can you feed that into an LLM and have it generate a piece of RAP or XAP code snippet or the code itself, right? So that's the next stage of the life cycle. Then once the software is ready, when the app is ready, the next big challenge is testing and validating, right? And this is not just related, not just specific to the app. This is more broadly applicable to Open RAN itself. We just heard in one of the earlier panels. It's great that we have decomposed the RAN and broken it down into smaller modular elements. But are the benefits of that modularity large enough to outweigh the costs of bringing those modular pieces together into a single system that works together? So system integration and just integration testing is a big challenge in Open RAN. And this is where, again, GenAI can be put to use very creatively for simple things like, can you generate test cases? Yeah. Right? For every single pair of integration that you need to do, you don't always need to have a human writing test cases for you, right? Yep. Once there are a few examples already, you can feed that examples to a foundation model, to a large language model, and have it generate test cases for you. It can even generate testing scripts, integration testing scripts. So the goal is to use GenAI is not magic. It will not completely solve the problem. It's a tool that you can use to accelerate the process, make it more efficient.
I think Salil wants to sell a code whisperer now.
Thank you.
Speaking of
and then once the app has been validated, then we come to the deployment problem. Like I mentioned, GenAI LLMs can be used to create those service descriptors that can be fed into orchestration solutions. And then finally we come to operations, and we have already talked a lot about
that
operation. Right? So I think that's a summary of what we do.
That's very helpful because we're almost out of time. But that summary I think was very useful because I think it summarized sort of the state of the conversation until now. It's kind of like catch me up type function, right, in your favorite Zoom or Teams or whatever it is. So you're now caught up thanks to Rakesh. I think you did a better job in ChatGPT or Claude. Well, maybe not Claude, right? But so we're almost out of time. But as a moderator, you have one tool you can use. It's called the lightning round. And so I know that there's plenty of topics to cover. There's still a lot of content. But I also want to be respectful of the demo that you're all going to stay and watch very diligently, and the lunch that's coming right outside. So we're going to go lightning round for the rest of the questions very quickly. And let's see how lightning the rounds are. So Gwenael, we're going to talk more about this later on in terms of sustainability, efficiency, and the like, right? So on one hand, telcos say sustainability, we need to save more energy. On the other hand, GenAI, that's great. Let's train more stuff. Let's fine tune more. Let's eat more power so we can save more power. How do we? Quick answer.
Yes, that's a very important question that we always have, including this morning.
Yes.
So I think the solution is to see we have a continuum of options from rule-based methods up to GenAI. Yeah. And if you use GenAI in real time on each radio unit, yes, indeed, you will kill your objective. Now, if you use a GenAI powerful server of 3 kilowatts, but with that, you can optimize the sleep mode management on 50 radio units of 64 by 64 MIMO of 3 kilowatts each. Sure. Yes. And then you will have a positive impact on that. And you have to take those decisions. So for each of the network functions, we can discuss.
Excellent. Thank you. Very, very, very good answer. What we're going to do now is, we promised the telco leadership we're going to give advice. So I'm going to ask you to answer this last question in terms of best practices and risk, and give advice to the telco leadership at the same time. So let's see if you can do that. So GenAI is changing all the time, all the functions, all the capabilities, all the workflows, all the methods, right? What's your recommendation for best practices, and what's your advice to a telco leader?
So it's really important for all of our customers to really think about the problem they're trying to solve and really look at GenAI as like a tool to solve that problem. So at Amazon, one of the principles we apply is really being really focused on working backwards from the problem statement. So we recommend looking at the problem, identifying the best foundation model that would be a good fit to actually try to solve that specific problem. That drives the decision on whether it's a 70 billion parameter model or a much smaller model, because all of those factors are important depending on the kind of complexity you need to solve that problem. being able to then take that foundation model decision and then think about what is the data that you're actually going to use to fine tune that model. Because, not every foundation model is going to be ideally suited. So you have to really take your data and actually use that to train that model. So fine tuning is a very critical part of being able to really take advantage of the LLM. So the fine tuning effort is heavily dependent on the data that you have.
Sure.
And being able to take the data that you have, feed that into the foundation model, but not just throw it in there. Think about how you structure the data. You might have data in different forms. And we've learned, at least from our own experience working with customers, that when you start structuring data, the outputs can actually be very different versus just throwing a bunch of unstructured data into the large language model. So putting the effort to figure out what sets of data you need in the data lake, how you put that together, feed that in an organized manner, very critical. And then the other aspect about large language models have this challenge around hallucination. I mean, everybody's heard about this concern, but this is something that needs really strict guardrails. Like, you need to put guardrails to define exactly how the model should respond depending on the situation. And sometimes it might say something that's untoward. Sometimes it may give you an output that's completely wrong. So being able to really put together data governance, best practices around working with the foundation models, taking the data and then putting that together to actually get the right outputs that you need in the right amount of time. All of that's critical. And the last point I'd mention is fine-tuning of large language models is not a simple, cheap process. It is a fairly expensive process. Really thinking about price performance of the infrastructure that you're using is a very critical part of all of this. So thinking through what is the kind of infrastructure you need? Is it a GPU? Is it a CPU? Is it custom silicon? Being able to take advantage of the right types of infrastructure where you're really getting the price performance you need for a chatbot versus a summarization effort versus being able to do troubleshooting. It might actually be different. And so it all comes into the fact of, like, yes, burning energy is one aspect of it, but the actual dollars and cents actually matter to our customers. Right. So it's very important to really look at that carefully.
Very fair. No, very valuable, right? Correlate data, structure your data, transform your data, pick the right models that you want to use, and then pick the right underlying infrastructure, choose the right thing for the right job, and understand why you're doing it. Thank you. Gloria, we keep talking about guardrails, but, what's the recommendation in terms of balancing innovation, which is really important and you want your team to run at a telco, right? How do you balance that with ethical AI practices?
Right. I would think of it in two ways, both on the development of the GenAI side and as the consumption, the user of the GenAI side. I think a lot of the peers on the panel, actually, they're the on the development side, they actually already for sure have, AI principles instilled as part of their organization. So when you think of that, obviously you do internal regular audit, obviously maybe collaborating with external oversight peers, such as, big tech. A lot of them actually created this frontier model forum, which they actually will influence policymaker, right? And then on the other side of the user of GenAI, we can obviously need to enforce guardrails inside of the organization to, for example, not let GenAI to determine or dictate the final hiring decision of your company, right? We're always, maybe instill a culture to allow, to ask users or, employees to always, share disclaimer or provide source when they actually use GenAI, contributed content. So I believe you need to look at both sides to make it round.
Excellent. And any words for telco leaders?
Yeah, actually, I think we talked quite a bit about sort of the power of, GenAI, but then what I wanted to highlight, especially power of GenAI from a use cases perspective, but I wanted to highlight is actually a softer impact about driving innovation culture in the company. Because many of us actually, we will be able to measure the use case impact, how much revenue it will bring, how much productivity can actually improve. But what's unmeasurable is actually when you embark on your GenAI journey or continue your GenAI journey, a sense of innovation is going to be instilled in your company. Your employee will actually start looking at use cases, not just those to set out for AI to solve, but actually you will be able to start reevaluate issues that in the past you haven't even thought about that you're going to use AI or technology to resolve. So you actually will be able to promote the sense of innovation, which in my opinion might be softer and grander impact that's going to bring to your company that typically in our experience will take years of talent strategy refinement to achieve. So, if you're in the, tech world, when you actually, explain the AI or GenAI impact to your customer, I think that's a softer impact you can actually articulate which you will bring to your customer, to the operators.
Very nice. So GenAI is a catalyst for culture change in the telco. Very important. Very cool. All right, promise to have you wrapped up in 2 minutes. So if I don't, it's not my fault. We're going to go with Rakesh and then Ajit and then Ravi, you have the last word. So turbo lightning round. Your advice to telco leaders. Rakesh, go ahead.
Yeah, so again, in chat GPT style, so I'll speak in bullet points. So probably three key takeaways, from this discussion for telco leaders. The first thing I would definitely advise is embrace GenAI. Second thing, focus on value creation. In the most immediate term, it's very important that they create value. And third, be mindful of the risks. Right? Those are three things. Like I'll just take maybe 15-20 seconds to expand on a little bit. The reason I explicitly call out that we need to embrace AI is because when I look around, even I see a lot of organizations, not telco, but in the broader world, a lot of organizations have still not embraced AI, right? In terms of investing in the data pipelines, data infrastructure, maybe streaming infrastructure if there's a real-time component involved. So now is another opportunity to catch up, right? Yep. So, and it's important to embrace it because, every once in a while, a transformative technology comes our way, like software happened, internet happened, right? And think about all those organizations who didn't embrace software or didn't embrace internet, and look where they are now, right? So it's extremely critical that we embrace GenAI. The second thing is focus on value creation. And I say this from the point of view of enabling and employing everyone in the organization to really find use cases, applications for GenAI for their specific problems, so that we quickly discover where the value is, right? And in this initial phases of discovery, it's okay to not worry about cost, right? So it's, empower your teams to use whatever tools they like, whatever models they like, whatever processes they like, but quickly discover where the value is. And once you have a few examples, then you can think about how do you consolidate and how do you optimize for cost, right? So value creation first, cost optimization second. And the third thing is be mindful of the risks. And when I look around, there are 4 main risks, that people talk about. The first and by far the biggest one is privacy, right? So depending on your enterprise, your organization, you will have to have a strategy for how you ensure privacy with the use of GenAI and LLMs. So you need to have a plan for that. The second thing is safety, right? Safe execution, or what do you do? What do people do or software do with the output of these GenAI models, right? So safety is another key consideration. There is explainability, and that may or may not apply to everyone, but in some cases, explainability is very, very important, right? So you need to have a plan for that. And the fourth thing that is very commonly talked about is sustainability, or the impact on carbon footprint, right? So these are at least 4 key risks or challenges or considerations that you will need to have a plan for as you think about GenAI for your own.
Excellent framework. All right, Ajit, you got to beat that.
Oh, sure. So we have been at it almost a year now. So some of the lessons, best practices, first of all, the potential is real. However, be realistic about the potential. So you might have read a report from McKinsey or one of their competitors that you can get a 50%, 100% jump in productivity. But that is going to be a journey.
Yes.
Your use case might start with, say, 5% improvement, and then hopefully you will continue on it to get that additional improvement. So just be realistic about getting all the ROI and how you achieve that ROI. The second, of course, we have talked a lot about the guardrails. So we also have a very well-established guardrail process. One area we didn't talk was business guardrails. So for example, the skill set, the true deep skill set is very much in short supply. So don't have like a very unfocused, scattered efforts. The second is on the business guardrails. It's the cost of a generative AI system is not, deterministic. It depends on what people, the number of tokens we pass on to, either Amir or sorry. And they, of course, like to have as many tokens being passed on to that. So have some guardrails on the cost structure. The third is is just constant change. So don't get locked yourself into either an architecture, vendor, cloud, or whatever provide. So for example, about a month back, I was on a call with one of the coding assistant vendors, and they wanted to us to roll it out to all like 5,000 software engineers. And I said, that's not going to happen. We'll probably, first of all, we don't know what you are bringing to the table. And we'll probably have a short list of coding assistants. And then we would probably let the engineers choose amongst them. That might be the better approach long term. So don't get locked into a particular solution or particular approach right now. It's just too early for that.
And the reason I'm smiling is because we have data that shows that customers, when they use something like Code Whisperer, can see 57% improvement in coding velocity, right? So if Ajit had that data point, maybe he'd be more convinced to go down that path.
He might have.
No, I agree with that. It's a journey to get to that 57%.
All right, we're at 1 o'clock. I know we're slightly late, and you're dying to see the demo, aren't you? So, but Ravi, last word. Telco leaders, what do you want to say to them, aside from watching the demo?
Yeah. So what our thrust would be to not let perfect be the enemy of good, right? So this, what we have encountered that we'd like to change is the pace at which telcos engage startups or even larger initiatives. Would love that to be faster. GenAI is moving so fast. So engagements, POCs in this space need to be defined from inception to conclusion in a time frame of months, not today that we all know time frame of POCs in telcos is like a couple of years.
Yes.
So that needs to change. And I think I echo what Ajit also said. Don't get too locked into fine-tuning versus using a publicly available foundational model. These models are changing so rapidly. If you go down the path of fine-tuning your model, then you are going to be stuck with maintaining and updating that model as that model is evolving. So think about that, and think about there's various versions of thinking about privacy. You can have on-prem publicly available foundational models. A lot of the foundational model companies are beginning to entertain that.
Yep.
And then the other, of course, the other extreme is to build your own foundational model from scratch. I would, at this point, I'd advise against that. But of course, to each telco to their...
Just need like 30, 40,000, GPUs, A100s.
Once you have a couple of billion.
Yeah.
I'll keep raising money like Anthropic. Just keep raising money and you'll be first. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Good. I think, quick question or? Yes, go ahead.
So, in RAN GPT, it's the data set coming from, notwithstanding the scientific data. I would imagine you would want maybe network optimization like that. You would want data from AT&T and Verizon and enterprise data. But those operators are not going to open that you want, especially if you're working with that. So how is the data set?
We have been very fortunate to get some data sets from operators that we use, and we heavily anonymize. We add some synthetic augmentation to that data to create a big enough data lake to be able to do an effective demo. But yes, we have, that's actually one thing I would like to echo what Rakesh said. We have been very pleasantly surprised at the pace at which telcos have been engaging on GenAI. The space at which telcos have engaged with AI has been around for almost 10 years, 15 years. Right? Telcos have been engaging with what somebody called old AI only very recently. But GenAI, the adoption and the interest, it's going to stick with you forever.
That was truly the highlight of the...
I think there was one takeaway from the entire event, right? So far, it's old AI.
Old AI. But the pace at which they've been engaging has been pleasantly surprising.
So bottom line,
as long as it's another one.
I would actually add another dimension to this is that no. Yeah. So the other dimension I would add is that there are mechanisms where the customer A could provide data to Aira to train and support that exercise. And that could be its own environment. And customer B could provide that data to Aira and create another silo. And each of them would have data completely independent, but be able to get the benefit of their solution. So there are mechanisms to do that. If once you're able to set up the right data infrastructure, be able to put guardrails between ensuring every customer's data is separate, you can still take advantage of that. You don't necessarily have. Now, obviously, there's advantage of pooling everything, but if customers don't want to do that, there are mechanisms to achieve this.
And that has to be the case because what's called standard operating procedures between operators are very different. How they even define certain parameters are going to be different. What certain operators are going to care about or optimize for is going to be different. The rules are going to be different. So we are almost certainly thinking of RAN GPT being version specialized and customized for an operator.
Yeah, operator specific. And just like everything else is operator specific. Welcome to the telco world, right? Anyway, so with that, let's wrap it up and let Ravi go ahead and show the demo.